CEO marries his secretary in a contract marriage, discovers a truth after one night, and falls deeply in love. Hello, my beautiful story family. Trust you are doing well. Today I'm feeling really excited to share this story with you. Your incredible response to our last video touched my heart deeply. Every comment, like, and share fills me with so much joy. You have no idea how much your engagement means to me. When I read your thoughtful comments and see how the stories resonate with you, it motivates me to keep bringing you these powerful tales of love and destiny. You're not just viewers, you're the heart and soul of this storytelling journey. Thank you so much for always showing your support. I pray God blesses you richly. Amen. Just this morning, as I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop working on today's story, something extraordinary caught my eye. An elderly couple, probably in their late 70s, sat at the table across from me. The gentleman, dressed in a crisp blue suit, carefully helped his wife with her coat before pulling out her chair. What struck me wasn't just their obvious care for each other, it was the way they looked at one another. After what must have been 50 years together, their eyes still held that special sparkle. When the wife reached across to straighten her husband's tie, he caught her hand and kissed it softly. That simple gesture spoke volumes about lasting love. It made me realize that true connection, the kind that defies time and circumstance, often begins in the most unexpected ways, just like the story I'm about to share with you today. But before we begin, my dear story family, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from. Drop your country's name in the comments below, and tell me, have you ever witnessed a moment of pure love that left you speechless? You know, those rare instances when time seems to stand still, and you're reminded of what really matters in life. Your stories and perspectives from different corners of the world make our community so special. They remind us that no matter where we come from, the language of love is truly universal. Speaking of unexpected love stories, today's tale will take us into the gleaming halls of Chen Industries, where power and passion collide in the most surprising way. You see, sometimes the greatest love stories aren't born in chance meetings at coffee shops or romantic dinner dates. Sometimes, they begin with a contract, a signature, and two people who think they have it all figured out. But life always has a beautiful way of proving us wrong. A powerful CEO believes love is nothing more than a business transaction. Little does he know, one night will change everything he thought he knew about love, success, and what truly matters. So hit the subscribe button right away if you've not done that yet and get comfortable, my dear story family, because this journey of discovery, vulnerability, and unexpected love is about to begin. And trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment. Michael Chen stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, the city sprawling before him like a kingdom of glass and steel. At 35, he commanded one of the most powerful corporations in Asia with the same quiet intensity that marked every aspect of his life. His reflection in the window showed a man others rarely saw, not the ruthless CEO of Chen Industries, but someone with eyes that held shadows of something missing. The evening sun caught on his platinum watch, a reminder of his first major merger. Everything in his life had a purpose, a calculated reason for existing. His tailored charcoal suit, chosen to command respect. His corner office, positioned to overlook his empire. Even his perfectly styled dark hair and clean-shaven face were part of the image he had crafted with meticulous care. Running his fingers along the edge of his mahogany desk, his father's last gift before passing, Michael allowed himself a rare moment of contemplation. The board meeting that morning had shifted something in his carefully controlled world. Their words about stability and public image still echoed in his mind. 15 years of relentless work had built this empire, yet here he stood, being told it wasn't enough. that he wasn't enough, not without the perfect partnership they demanded. Michael's journey to the top began in a modest apartment above his father's struggling electronics shop. Those early years taught him the raw truth about success: it favored those who refused to rest. At 19, while his peers chased weekend parties, he spent nights studying market trends and business strategies, turning his father's small shop into a regional electronics supplier. By 23, he had secured his first major contract, transforming their family business into Chen Electronics Limited. The industry veterans laughed at first, a young man barely out of college, claiming he could revolutionize the Asian tech market. Their laughter stopped when he acquired their floundering companies one by one, each purchase more strategic than the last. His father watched with pride as their small enterprise grew into an empire, but never lived to see his son claim the CEO position at 30. The morning of his appointment, Michael placed his father's old calculator on his new desk, a reminder of where it all began. That same calculator sat there now, its worn buttons telling stories of late nights and endless calculations. The business world called him the Phoenix of Asia, rising from humble beginnings to soar above his competitors. Every merger, every acquisition added another floor to his corporate tower, another zero to his net worth. He turned failing companies into gold, transformed outdated systems into cutting-edge operations. His reputation for excellence became legendary, his name synonymous with success. But success came with its price. While competitors hosted lavish parties on their yachts, Michael spent his evenings in his office, planning his next move. When others celebrated their wins with champagne, he was already strategizing his next victory. Every step up the corporate ladder was calculated, every handshake part of a greater plan. This wasn't just ambition, it was his life's work, his legacy, his everything. Success built walls that no one seemed able to scale. From his penthouse office, Michael watched his employees leave each evening, heading home to their families, their lives, their real worlds. For him, the office had become both sanctuary and prison. The higher he climbed, the more isolated he became. His executive assistant had long ago stopped asking if he'd attend the company social events. The Christmas parties, team celebrations, retirement gatherings, they all blurred together in a series of polite declines. Even his mother's persistent attempts to introduce him to suitable young women had dwindled to occasional, resigned phone calls. The truth was, relationships required vulnerability, and vulnerability was a luxury he couldn't afford. Every attempted connection ended the same way, with questions about his wealth, his influence, his power. Never about the man who still missed his father's guidance, who secretly enjoyed old black and white films, who couldn't cook to save his life but made the best coffee in 3 continents. His closest companion these days was the soft hum of his laptop, the gentle whir of his office air conditioning, and the distant sound of the city below. Even his board members, who'd known him for years, maintained a careful distance. They respected him, feared him perhaps, but none truly knew him. It was the price of power, a throne built too high for anyone else to reach. Yet lately, in quiet moments like these, the emptiness felt heavier than usual. The morning's board meeting still rang in Michael's ears. The words of Thomas Wei, his most senior board member, cut through the silence of his office. "The company needs stability, Mr. Chen. Our shareholders are concerned about succession, about legacy. A man in your position should project permanence." He had sat there, surrounded by 12 pairs of expectant eyes, each board member clutching their tablets filled with statistics and projections. They had charts showing how married CEOs statistically led to more stable stock prices. Presentations about public perception and family-oriented leadership. data proving that traditional family values attracted more conservative investors. Your brilliance in business is unquestioned, Margaret Ju had added, her voice carrying the weight of 30 years in corporate governance. But Chen Industries is entering a new phase. We're no longer just a regional powerhouse, we're going global. Our partners, especially in the West, they value traditional structures. Family men. The pressure wasn't just about marriage. It was about fitting into their perfect corporate mold. They wanted press photos with a suitable wife at charity galas. Holiday cards featuring a picture-perfect family to send to shareholders. A carefully crafted image that would make old money investors feel comfortable entrusting their millions to Chen Industries. Michael's fingers traced the edge of the proposal they'd left on his desk. We've taken the liberty of creating a list of potential candidates, they'd said. Daughters of business partners, accomplished professionals from good families, all pre-vetted to meet their exacting standards. As if love and marriage were just another merger to be negotiated. But it was the deadline that truly showed their hand. 6 months. They had given him 6 months to find a wife and settle down, or they would need to re-evaluate the company's leadership structure. A polite corporate threat wrapped in concern for the company's future. On the other end was Grace Mitchell. She wasn't born into the world of high-rise offices and corporate power plays. At 28, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that set her apart from the usual corporate climbers at Chen Industries. Her small desk outside the CEO's office told only half the story, the half about a brilliant young woman who graduated top of her class, whose recommendation sparkled with phrases like exceptional mind and unmatched work ethic. The other half of her story played out in the way she carefully packed her lunch each day, how she made her coffee last until afternoon, and the subtle mending on her elegant but well-worn clothes. Each designer piece in her wardrobe was a carefully planned investment, bought from consignment shops and altered to perfection. Her notebook, always at hand, was filled with precise handwriting that revealed her attention to detail and the economics degree she'd earned on scholarship. Behind her professional demeanor lay a mind that could catch accounting discrepancies others missed and memorize complex schedules without effort. She spoke 3 languages fluently, skills gained from years of summer jobs as a tutor. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced precision, turning chaos into order with each report she prepared. But it was her eyes that told the most interesting story, bright with intelligence and determination, yet holding a weight of responsibility few her age carried. While other executive assistants spent their lunch breaks networking and gossiping, Grace could be found at her desk, reviewing market reports and studying industry trends. Not because it was required, but because each piece of knowledge was a step toward the future she planned for herself and her family. The reality of Grace's life existed far from the gleaming hallways of Chen Industries. Each evening, she returned to a small apartment in the city's outskirts, where her mother battled chronic illness and mounting medical bills. The apartment walls held family photos that told a story of better days, before her father's small business went under, before his heart attack left them drowning in hospital debt, before she had to become the family's sole provider at 25. Her younger brother, David, was in his final year of medical school, his dreams of becoming a doctor sustained by her unwavering support. Each month, she sent half her salary to cover his tuition, carefully calculating every expense down to the last dollar. Their mother had wanted both her children to pursue their dreams, but life had forced Grace to put hers on hold. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd earned her economics degree with honors, dreaming of running her own investment firm, only to spend her days managing someone else's schedule. The weight of responsibility showed in the careful way she tracked her expenses in a worn leather notebook, allocating every bonus and overtime payment between her mother's medical treatments and David's education. Her own dreams were neatly filed away in a folder labeled Future Plans, a collection of business proposals and market analyses she worked on during quiet evenings at home. Her co-workers never knew about the nights she spent helping her mother through pain episodes, or the early mornings when she worked as a virtual language tutor for overseas students to earn extra income. They didn't see her carefully portioning out her mother's medications each week, counting pills and dollars with equal precision. The only hint of her struggles was the thermos of home-brewed coffee she carried each day, and the way she made her lunch stretch through dinner when she worked late. The moment that changed everything came during a crisis that would have crushed a lesser assistant. On a critical Thursday morning, with the Hong Kong merger hanging by a thread, Grace discovered a significant error in the financial projections just 30 minutes before the board presentation. Most assistants would have passed the problem up the chain of command, washing their hands of responsibility. But Grace's mind worked differently. In 27 minutes, she reconstructed the entire financial model, identifying a calculation flaw that would have cost the company millions. With 3 minutes to spare, she knocked on Michael's office door. The CEO had been reviewing his presentation notes when she entered, her usual calm demeanor marked by an intensity he'd never noticed before. "Mr. Chen, I apologize for the interruption, but you need to see this." Her voice held the quiet confidence of someone who knew their worth. As she walked him through her findings, her fingers flying across the keyboard, he found himself watching her face instead of the screen. The way her eyes lit up as she explained complex financial concepts, the precise manner in which she broke down the numbers. In that moment, Michael saw past the efficient assistant who managed his calendar. He saw the sharp intelligence behind her professional facade, the quick mind that had just saved his company from a devastating mistake. When she finished her explanation, the room fell silent. For the first time in years, Michael Chen felt genuinely surprised. "How did you catch this?" he asked, studying her with new interest. "I always review the financial models, sir," she replied simply. "Numbers tell stories, if you know how to read them." From that day forward, something shifted in the carefully maintained professional distance between them. Michael found his eyes lingering on her desk as he passed, noticing small details he'd overlooked before, the fresh flowers she brought every Monday, the elegant way she handled difficult phone calls, the subtle grace of her movements as she worked. During late meetings, he became acutely aware of her presence, the soft click of her heels on marble floors, the delicate scent of jasmine that announced her arrival with fresh coffee. He caught himself looking forward to their morning briefings, those quiet moments when she would review his schedule, her voice steady and professional even as something electric filled the air between them. Grace felt it too, the change in his gaze when she entered his office, the way their fingers would brush during document exchanges, sending unexpected waves of warmth through her body. She found herself taking extra care with her appearance each morning, though she told herself it was simply professional pride. The way her heart raced when he said her name became her most closely guarded secret. They danced around this unspoken thing, maintaining their roles with practiced precision. In meetings, she kept her eyes on her tablet, ignoring the magnetic pull she felt whenever he spoke. He forced himself to focus on contracts and mergers, not the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when deep in thought. Their conversations remained strictly professional, yet each word seemed to carry hidden meaning, every silence charged with things left unsaid. Neither dared acknowledge the tension that hummed between them like a live wire. They were too different, their worlds too far apart. He was bound by corporate expectations and board pressure, she was constrained by family obligations and financial reality. Besides, office romances were messy, complicated, and absolutely forbidden by company policy. My beautiful story family, just before we continue, I want to take this moment to know your thoughts so far. Have you ever been in such a situation like this where your heart skipped a beat for someone who seemed completely out of reach, someone you knew could change your whole world? Then this moment is for you. Quickly tell me, how did it go for you? Messy? Or did it end in something beautiful? Also, click that like button right now so I'll know if it's just me or if you've also ever felt that electric connection, that magnetic pull toward someone who was absolutely forbidden. And trust me, you'll want to be part of our journey as this story unfolds, because what comes next will take your breath away. Hit that subscribe button and join our amazing family now, because the real magic is about to begin. The boardroom fell silent as Thomas Wei placed the folder on the polished table. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the faces of 12 board members who had gathered for this private session. Michael's fingers tightened imperceptibly around his pen as he took in their expressions, a mix of determination and calculated concern. "The decision is unanimous, Mr. Chen," Margaret Zhu's voice cut through the silence. "We've given you time to consider our previous discussions about stability. Now, we need action." She slid the folder toward him, its contents outlining their demands in cold, corporate language. 3 months. That's your window to announce an engagement. 6 months to marry. The markets need reassurance, and our major investors are watching closely. Thomas Wei leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of 4 decades in corporate leadership. "We've prepared a list of suitable candidates. Daughters of our business partners, accomplished professionals from respected families. All vetted, all appropriate for someone of your position. Choose one. Make it look real. Give the public the story they want, the successful CEO finding love, settling down, securing the future of Chen Industries." Back in his office, Michael stood by the window, the board's list of potential brides scattered across his desk. Each profile read like a corporate merger proposal: educational backgrounds, family connections, social standings. All perfectly curated, all completely hollow. His reflection in the window showed a man at war with himself. Then his eyes fell on Grace's desk outside his office. She was focused on her computer screen, her fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard as she handled his empire's daily demands. He remembered how she'd saved the Hong Kong deal, how she understood the language of numbers and power as fluently as he did. An idea began to form, dangerous, brilliant, and perfectly logical. Grace Mitchell wasn't on the board's list. She didn't come from a wealthy family or have powerful connections. But she had something more valuable: intelligence, discretion, and most importantly, she understood business. She would see this for what it needed to be: a strategic alliance, nothing more. He watched her through the glass walls of his office, calculating the advantages. She knew the company inside and out. She could handle herself in corporate settings. She was beautiful enough to make their story believable, smart enough to play her role convincingly, and dependent enough on her job to understand the importance of discretion. The more he thought about it, the more perfect it seemed. A classic tale of the CEO falling for his secretary. The media would devour it. The board would have their stability, the shareholders their story of romance, and he would have a wife who understood that this was simply another business transaction. Michael's finger hovered over the intercom button for a full minute before he pressed it. "Grace, could you step into my office?" His voice betrayed none of the tension he felt. He watched through the glass as she gathered her tablet and pen, her usual preparation for their morning meetings. She couldn't know this morning would be anything but usual. The contract sat heavy in the leather portfolio on his desk. Hours spent with lawyers crafting every detail, every clause designed to protect both parties. Still, his hand tensed slightly as she entered the office, professional as always with her notebook ready. "Please, take a seat," he said, waiting until she settled into the chair across from him. For a moment, he studied her, poised, efficient, completely unaware of how her life was about to change. "What I'm about to propose is unconventional." The moment he slid the contract across his desk, he saw the subtle shift in her expression. Her eyes widened slightly as she read the title, Marriage Contract and Terms of Agreement. Her carefully maintained composure cracked, just for a second, before her professional mask slipped back into place. "You'll maintain your position as executive assistant, but with a significant pay increase," he explained, his voice steady and businesslike. "The contract stipulates a 2-year marriage minimum. Everything will appear authentic to the outside world, shared public appearances, coordinated social media presence, joint attendance at corporate events." His finger traced down the page, highlighting key points. "Your family's medical expenses will be fully covered. Your brother's medical school tuition, guaranteed through completion. A separate account will be established in your name with a monthly allowance for maintaining appropriate appearances, clothing, jewelry, social obligations." The final pages outlined the exit strategy. "After 2 years, we'll announce an amicable separation. You'll receive a substantial settlement, enough to secure your family's future and perhaps start that investment firm you've dreamed of." He paused, watching her hands tremble slightly as she turned another page. "There's also a strict confidentiality clause. The true nature of our arrangement can never be revealed." Grace stared at the contract, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. The words blurred and refocused as her mind raced through the implications. 2 years of her life in exchange for everything her family needed, the solution to every problem that kept her awake at night, wrapped in legal terminology and offered across a mahogany desk. Her economics degree helped her understand every clause, every carefully worded provision. But it couldn't help her process the emotion threatening to crack her professional veneer. This was business, she told herself. Just business. Yet her hands trembled slightly as she turned another page, feeling Michael's eyes on her. She thought of her mother, lying in that small bedroom surrounded by beeping medical equipment. Of David, working double shifts at the campus cafe between medical school classes. One signature could change everything for them. Her dreams of running her own investment firm could become reality, not just notes in a worn notebook. But beneath the logical calculations, her heart waged a different battle. The subtle tension that had been building between her and Michael these past months took on new meaning. How could she pretend to be his wife while fighting her growing attraction to him? How could she share his space, his name, his life, knowing it was all carefully choreographed for public consumption? Her fingers traced the edges of the contract as memories flashed through her mind, the way his cologne lingered in the elevator, how his rare smiles made her heart skip, the electricity when their hands brushed during coffee handoffs. Now she would have to live with those moments daily, always remembering none of it was real. That evening, Grace sat at her mother's bedside, the weight of the contract heavy in her thoughts. The small apartment felt more confining than usual as she watched her mother struggle to sit up against the pillows, each movement a reminder of why this decision wasn't just about her. "Something's different," her mother said, reaching for Grace's hand. Years of illness hadn't dimmed Mrs. Mitchell's ability to read her daughter. "You're carrying a burden, my dear. Tell me." Grace took a deep breath, carefully explaining the contract marriage proposal, watching her mother's expression shift from surprise to concern to careful consideration. She left out the growing attraction she felt toward Michael, focusing instead on the practical aspects, the medical care, David's tuition, the financial security. "It's a business arrangement," Grace finished, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "Nothing more." Her mother's eyes, wise with years of hardship, studied her face. "And this man, this CEO, he's kind?" "He's fair," Grace answered, remembering Michael's quiet strength, his hidden moments of consideration. "Professional. Respected." From the next room, the sound of David talking to his medical school study group drifted in, her younger brother's dream of becoming a doctor hanging by the thread of student loans and part-time jobs. Her mother's medication schedule lay on the bedside table, each pill representing another bill they could barely afford. "You've always carried us," her mother whispered, squeezing her hand. "Since your father passed, you've put everyone else first. But marriage, even a contract one, that's your heart you're putting on the line." Grace stood up to the apartment window, watching the city lights blur through unshed tears. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, "That's your heart you're putting on the line." Behind her, the soft whir of her mother's oxygen machine kept time with her thoughts. "I can handle it," she whispered to her reflection. She'd handled everything else, the medical bills, the midnight emergencies, the weight of being everyone's support. This was just another challenge, another mountain to climb. Yet something felt different about this decision. But then David walked in, his med school textbooks clutched to his chest, dark circles under his eyes from juggling studies and work. He gave her that same bright smile he'd had since childhood, the one that always reminded her why she pushed so hard, worked so long. In that moment, her decision crystallized. Love was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. She had a chance to secure her family's future, to give David his dream, to ensure her mother got the best care. A contract marriage to Michael Chen wasn't just an opportunity, it was the answer to every prayer she'd whispered in the dark. "I accept." The words left Grace's lips softly as she stood in Michael's office that morning. He looked up from his computer, his expression shifting from surprise to something she couldn't quite read. For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of her decision filling the space between them. "You're certain?" His voice was quieter than usual, studying her face as if searching for doubt. "Yes." Simple, firm, final. Within hours, they sat in the prestigious law office that breathed old money and power, all mahogany panels and leather chairs. Grace's navy dress complemented Michael's suit, an unplanned detail that made them look like a coordinated couple already. The morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a golden glow over the contract pages before them. 3 lawyers, the board chairman Thomas Wei, and a notary watched as Michael lifted the Mont-Blanc pen. His signature flowed across the page with practiced ease, the same confident strokes that approved million-dollar deals. When he passed the pen to Grace, their fingers brushed, a moment of warmth in this coldly professional ceremony. Grace's hand remained steady as she signed, her economics training helping her maintain composure even as her pulse raced. Each stroke of her signature transformed her from Grace Mitchell, executive assistant, to Grace Mitchell Chen, wife of one of Asia's most powerful CEOs. "Congratulations," Thomas Wei said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes as the notary stamped each page. "The press release will go out at noon. We've arranged for a photographer to capture your exit from the building, your first public appearance as a couple." Michael couldn't explain why his hand lingered at the small of Grace's back as they walked through the building lobby. The gesture was meant for the photographers waiting outside, yet something about the warmth of her beneath his palm felt right. natural. He found himself watching her reflection in the brass elevator doors, noticing how perfectly she fit beside him. These weren't thoughts he should be having about a business arrangement. But they crept in anyway, observations about how her eyes caught the light, how she unconsciously mirrored his stride, how the subtle scent of her perfume made him want to lean closer. Each detail filed away in his mind against his better judgment. Grace fought her own battle with every step. The solid presence of his hand on her back sent waves of warmth through her body. She'd promised herself this would be purely business, yet her heart raced at his proximity. In the elevator's reflection, she caught him watching her, his dark eyes holding something that made her breath catch. She looked away quickly, reminding herself that this was all for show. They paused before the lobby doors, knowing cameras waited outside. Without a word, Michael turned to face her, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture looked perfectly romantic to any observers, a tender moment between newlyweds. But Grace felt the gentle brush of his fingers like a brand against her skin, and the softness in his eyes made her wonder if he was still acting. "Ready?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. The question seemed to hold more weight than just facing the photographers. "Yes," she answered, unsure if she was lying to him or herself. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining with an ease that scared her. This wasn't part of their contract, this flutter in her chest when he squeezed her hand, this desire to lean into his strength, this dangerous wish that any part of this could be real. The cameras flashed as they stepped outside, capturing what appeared to be a perfect moment, the powerful CEO and his beautiful bride. But beneath the polished surface, currents of tension crackled between them. Each posed photo brought them closer, each touch lingered longer than strictly necessary for their audience. In the car afterward, the silence felt heavy with words neither dared to speak. Michael found himself gripping the steering wheel too tightly, hyper-aware of Grace beside him. The scent of her perfume filled the confined space, making it hard to focus on the road. He caught himself stealing glances at her profile, watching how she absently twisted her new wedding ring, a nervous gesture that seemed too genuine for their charade. Grace stared out the window, her thoughts a dangerous tangle of professional duty and personal longing. The weight of his ring on her finger felt both foreign and right. When he shifted gears, his hand brushed her knee, and the brief contact sent electricity through her body. She watched his reflection in the window, noting how his jaw clenched, how his eyes kept finding her in the mirror. Neither spoke about the way their hearts had raced during the photos, or how natural it felt to lean into each other. They didn't mention the moment his lips had brushed her cheek for the cameras, softer and more intimate than any staged kiss needed to be. Instead, they maintained their careful silence, each lost in thoughts of what they couldn't have, shouldn't want, and might never admit to wanting. The grand ballroom of the Peninsula Hotel sparkled with calculated extravagance. Crystal chandeliers cast diamonds of light across the sea of designer suits and evening gowns, while white orchids cascaded from centerpieces that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Every detail screamed old money, power, and corporate royalty. The board had spared no expense in crafting their fairy tale. 300 of Asia's most influential business leaders mingled with politicians and celebrities, all gathered to witness the union of Michael Chen and his bride. String quartets played softly in the corners, champagne flowed endlessly, and photographers circled like elegant sharks, hunting for the perfect shot. Grace stood at Michael's side, a vision in white silk that whispered against the marble floors. Her wedding gown, selected by the board's image consultants, made her look like she'd stepped out of a luxury magazine. If anyone noticed her fingers trembling slightly on her champagne glass, they attributed it to bridal nerves. Michael played his role perfectly, his hand resting possessively at her waist as they greeted guests. His usual stoic demeanor softened whenever he looked at her, a detail that had the society photographers clicking frantically. Every gesture between them had been choreographed by the PR team, yet something authentic kept slipping through the cracks. "You make a beautiful couple," Margaret Jew commented, her approval evident as she watched them work the room. "The markets will respond well to this union." She spoke of their marriage like a successful merger, which in many ways it was. The board members exchanged satisfied glances, watching their CEO transform from powerful bachelor to devoted husband before their eyes. Headlines exploded across Asia's financial news networks. Chen Industries CEO weds in stunning ceremony. Business magazines rushed special editions, their covers featuring the perfect shot, Michael gazing at Grace as she smiled up at him, the intimacy of the moment captured in perfect lighting. Romance in the boardroom, how love changed Asia's most eligible CEO, read the Financial Times. The story spun their tale beautifully, the brilliant executive assistant who captured her boss's heart, the powerful CEO who found love right outside his office door. Social media buzzed with clips of their first dance, the tender way Michael adjusted Grace's necklace, the soft whispers they shared between greetings. Chen stock rose 3 points this morning, Thomas Wei murmured, showing Michael his tablet during a brief moment alone. The public loves a love story. Every major publication has picked it up. The narrative is perfect, the driven businessman finally opening his heart, the talented woman who brought warmth to his world. The photos circulating showed exactly what the board wanted: tender glances, subtle touches, two people who couldn't quite hide their attraction. What the cameras couldn't capture was how real those moments felt, how neither Michael nor Grace could tell anymore where the act ended and truth began. But behind crystal champagne flutes and designer clutches, the whispers followed Grace like shadows. "Secretary to CEO's wife," they murmured. "How convenient. Wonder how long she planned this." The elite circles of Asian high society weren't known for their subtlety, and their judgment cut sharp beneath polite smiles. Grace heard every whisper, caught every pointed glance. Yet she moved through the reception with gentle grace, her head held high, her smile serene. When a board member's wife loudly wondered about her humble background, she responded with such eloquent charm about her economics degree and market insights that the woman was left speechless. During dinner, she handled the complex table settings with natural elegance, surprising those who expected her to fumble. She conversed effortlessly about global markets with banking executives, discussed classical music with cultural ministers, and charmed international diplomats in their native tongues. Each perfectly handled interaction chipped away at their preconceptions. "You think she picked up those social graces answering phones?" one socialite whispered cattily. "No," her companion replied, watching Grace expertly navigate a delicate political discussion between rival business leaders. "But I'd say a first-class economics degree and fluency in 3 languages might help." Through it all, Grace maintained her composure. When she caught snippets of gossip about gold-digging secretaries, she simply drew closer to Michael, their natural chemistry silencing the critics. Every raised eyebrow was met with impeccable manners, every snide comment countered with intelligent conversation. She transformed their judgment into admiration, one interaction at a time. Throughout the evening, Michael found himself increasingly distracted by Grace. Not by their rehearsed interactions or planned appearances, but by the small moments in between. The quiet strength she showed when facing the whispers, the intelligence that flashed in her eyes during complex discussions, the natural elegance that made mockery of any gossip about her background. He watched her charm the Malaysian ambassador with perfect Mandarin, then switched seamlessly to Cantonese for the Hong Kong investors. Each graceful movement, each diplomatic response, each warm smile revealed layers he'd somehow missed during their years of working together. How had he never noticed the subtle fire in her spirit, the sharp wit beneath her professional demeanor? During their first dance, he felt her tension ease as he pulled her closer than strictly necessary. "You're surprising everyone," he murmured in her ear, his breath stirring loose strands of her hair. He felt her slight shiver at his closeness, noted how perfectly she fit in his arms. "Including you," she whispered back, her eyes meeting his with a hint of challenge that made his heart skip. The question lingered in his mind as they moved across the dance floor. Yes, she was surprising him. With her strength, her grace under pressure, the way she turned criticism into respect. But more than that, she was surprising him with how real this felt. How right. When she laughed at something he said, a genuine, unplanned laugh that lit up her whole face, he caught himself wanting to hear that sound again. When she unconsciously leaned into his touch during photos, he found himself drawing her closer, no cameras necessary. Each genuine moment between them felt more dangerous than the last, threatening the careful walls around his heart. Between the camera flashes and practiced smiles, truth lived in the smallest moments. Like how Michael automatically reached for 2 coffee cups each morning, fixing Grace's exactly as she liked it, a habit from their office days that felt different now in their shared penthouse. Or how he'd press his hand to the small of her back when they walked, not because anyone was watching, but because it had become as natural as breathing. Grace noticed her own betraying habits forming. The way she'd straighten his tie before meetings without thinking, letting her fingers linger a moment too long. How she found herself setting aside the financial articles he'd want to read with his morning coffee. The gentle way she'd remind him to eat during long workdays, placing his favorite dumplings on his desk when he was lost in contracts. Their domestic dance in the penthouse revealed more than either admitted. Michael discovering that Grace hummed softly while reviewing documents, a sound that made him smile despite himself. Grace learning that Michael had a habit of falling asleep on the living room couch, surrounded by papers, his face peaceful in sleep. She'd started keeping a blanket nearby, draping it over him on those late nights. These weren't the grand gestures caught by cameras or reported in society pages. They were quiet moments, unplanned and unrehearsed. The way he'd automatically reach to steady her when she slipped off her heels after a long day. How she knew to bring him green tea instead of coffee when his shoulders tensed with stress. Small kindnesses that spoke louder than their rehearsed public appearances. Living together created countless opportunities for unplanned contact, each touch sending electricity through both of them. In the kitchen one morning, Grace reached for the coffee cups just as Michael turned, causing her to bump against his chest. His hands caught her waist to steady her, and for a moment, neither moved, both acutely aware of their proximity. The elevator rides to their office became daily exercises in self-control. Each sudden stop would shift them closer, his arm brushing hers, her shoulder touching his chest. The confined space filled with unspoken tension, with the scent of his cologne and her perfume mingling in dangerous ways. Their home office proved especially treacherous. Reviewing documents together meant leaning close, shoulders touching as they studied the same papers. When their fingers brushed over contract pages or tablet screens, the contact felt like sparks against their skin. Sometimes, Grace would feel Michael's breath on her neck as he looked over her shoulder at a document, sending shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with the office temperature. Even their morning routine became a dance of accidental intimacy. Passing in the hallway, squeezing past each other in the walk-in closet, reaching for the same door handle, Each brief touch added fuel to the fire building between them. Neither acknowledged how these moments made their hearts race, how they'd started taking less care to avoid such contact, how they'd begun finding excuses for these accidental touches. The air in the penthouse grew thicker with each passing day, charged with everything left unsaid. During late-night contract reviews, Grace caught Michael watching her instead of the documents, his dark eyes holding questions neither dared to ask. She'd pretend not to notice, but her pulse quickened under his gaze, her fingers fumbling with paper clips and pen caps. Their shared meals became exercises in restraint. Grace would feel his eyes follow her movements as she reached for her wine glass. Michael found himself mesmerized by the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the elegant line of her neck when she laughed at something he said. Simple dinners stretched longer each evening, neither wanting to break the spell of these unguarded moments. The boundaries between their professional and personal lives began to blur. In board meetings, Michael's hand would rest on her chair, not touching, but close enough that Grace could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. During corporate events, their practiced poses felt less like acting and more like permission to stand closer, to touch longer, to look at each other the way they did in private. Their conversation started carrying double meanings, loaded with subtext neither acknowledged. When Grace asked about his plans for the evening, her voice held a note of hope she couldn't quite hide. When Michael suggested they review contracts at home rather than the office, his invitation seemed to offer more than just a change of venue. Even their silence became dangerous, heavy with possibility, thick with unspoken desires. Working late in their home office, the space between them felt magnetic, drawing them closer despite their best intentions. The simple act of passing a coffee cup became charged with tension, their fingers brushing deliberately now, each touch a question neither was ready to answer. When the cameras stopped flashing and the business world wasn't watching, Michael's gaze changed. Gone was the calculated affection of their public appearances, replaced by something raw and unguarded. He watched her in quiet moments, when she curled up on the living room sofa with financial reports, her feet tucked under her, completely absorbed in her work. His eyes would track her morning routine, noting how she'd pause by the windows to watch the sunrise over the city, coffee cup cradled in her hands. He found himself studying the way sunlight played across her face, how she absent-mindedly twisted her wedding ring when deep in thought, the subtle changes in her expression as she read through market reports. During their shared breakfast, he'd catch himself staring at her over his tablet, watching how she'd furrow her brow while analyzing the morning's financial news. When she spoke about market trends or corporate strategy, passion lighting up her features, he'd forget to listen to the words, lost in the animation of her expressions. Late at night, when she thought he was focused on work, he studied her reflection in his office windows. The way she'd kick off her heels under her desk, the gentle curve of her neck as she reviewed documents, how she'd bite her lower lip when concentrating. These private glimpses of Grace revealed a beauty no camera could capture, natural, unposed, utterly captivating. Sometimes their eyes would meet in these unguarded moments, catching each other watching. Instead of looking away, they'd hold the gaze a beat too long, neither willing to break the connection. In these seconds, Michael's eyes held something deeper than attraction, a tenderness that scared them both, a hunger that had nothing to do with their contract, and everything to do with the heart he'd promised wouldn't be involved. My beautiful story family, if your heart is racing watching these two souls dance around their feelings, you're not alone. Drop destiny in the comments if you can feel the electricity between them, if you believe some loves are written in the stars despite all odds. Because what happens next, what happens next will take your breath away. When business and passion collide, when hearts can't deny what the mind tries to fight, that's when magic happens. Stay with me, because the next part of their story will make you believe in true love all over again. By the way, if you've not subscribed yet, do so quickly before we continue. Your simple act of subscribing and joining this family means a lot to me. It encourages me to keep putting out these amazing stories for you. Now let's get back into our story. The annual Chen Industries charity gala marked their 2-month wedding anniversary, though neither mentioned this coincidence. Grace stood before her bedroom mirror, studying her reflection with a critical eye. Tonight would be different. No more playing it safe with classic black dresses and subtle jewelry. Tonight, she'd chosen something bold. The red silk gown hugged every curve before flowing to the floor like liquid fire. Unlike her usual conservative choices, this dress dared to bare one shoulder, the fabric draped in a way that suggested more than it revealed. Her dark hair, usually pulled back in professional styles, now fell in soft waves past her shoulders. The diamond earrings Michael had given her caught the light with every movement, drawing attention to the elegant line of her neck. Even her makeup marked a departure from her usual subtle approach. Smoky eyes made the amber flecks in her brown eyes more pronounced, and her lips wore a shade of red that matched her dress perfectly. The overall effect transformed her from efficient corporate wife to something else entirely, something dangerous. Her personal assistant, recommended by the board to help maintain their image, gasped when she entered the room. "Mrs. Chen, you looked, the press will go wild." Grace smiled at her reflection, wondering if a certain CEO would notice the change as much as the press surely would. She slipped on her heels, stilettos that added inches to her height and made her legs look endless under the dress's daring side slit. Michael's world stopped the moment Grace entered the ballroom. The subtle gasps from nearby guests echoed his own stunned reaction. The red silk gown transformed his composed, professional wife into a vision that made his throat go dry. He wasn't the only one who noticed. James Wong, the young tech billionaire whose company they were courting for a merger, reached Grace before Michael could cross the room. Wong's appreciation was obvious as he bent to kiss Grace's hand, his eyes lingering too long on the curve of her bare shoulder. Michael's fingers tightened around his whiskey glass as he watched Wong lead her toward the drinks, leaning close to whisper something that made her laugh. Throughout the evening, Michael found himself increasingly distracted by who was talking to Grace, touching her arm, standing too close. The Vietnamese investment banker who kept requesting dances. The British venture capitalist who brought her champagne. Each laugh she gave them felt like a personal betrayal, though he had no right to such feelings. "Your wife is quite the sensation tonight," Thomas Wei commented, appearing at Michael's side. "Every eligible bachelor in Asia seems captivated." Michael grunted in response, his eyes fixed on the French CFO now monopolizing Grace's attention. The man's hand rested just a fraction too low on her back as they chatted, and Michael felt heat rise in his chest. He told himself this possessiveness was just part of their act. That his clenched jaw and tight shoulders were merely maintaining appearances. But when Wong cut in on Grace's dance with the French CFO, trailing his fingers down her bare arm, Michael's control snapped. He set down his drink with dangerous precision. Contract or not, some lines couldn't be crossed. Without a word, Michael cut through the dance floor, his presence parting the crowd like water. The song shifted to something slow and intimate as he reached Grace and Wong. "Mind if I dance with my wife?" His tone made it clear it wasn't really a question. Grace felt Michael's hand slide around her waist, pulling her closer than their usual public appearances required. The heat of his palm burned through the silk of her dress, his fingers splayed possessively against her lower back. Their bodies moved together with a natural grace that made other couples stop to watch. "You've been busy tonight," he murmured, his lips close to her ear. His voice carried an edge she'd never heard before. Grace felt her pulse quicken at his proximity, at the barely contained tension in his touch. "Just networking," she replied softly, meeting his dark gaze. "Isn't that what you wanted? The perfect corporate wife?" His hand tightened on her waist in response. They moved across the floor in perfect sync, every step bringing them closer. The electricity between them was visible enough that phones came out to capture what looked like a romantic moment between the power couple. If only they knew how real the tension was. Grace felt herself getting lost in the moment, in the possessive way he held her, in the scent of his cologne and the heat of his body against hers. This wasn't their usual careful performance. This felt raw, real, dangerous. The tension from the dance floor followed them to Michael's Aston Martin, thick and heavy in the confined space. Grace sat beside him, the red silk of her dress a splash of color in the dark car interior. Neither spoke as they pulled away from the gala, the city lights streaming past like stars. Michael's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his jaw tight as he navigated through late-night traffic. The silence between them crackled with unspoken words. When they stopped at a red light, Grace caught him staring at her reflection in the window, his eyes tracing the curve of her bare shoulder. "You seem to enjoy yourself tonight," he finally said, his voice low and controlled. The light turned green, and the car surged forward with more force than necessary. "Wong certainly couldn't take his eyes off you." "He's a potential business partner," Grace replied, watching his profile in the darkness. "Isn't that what this marriage is about? Business?" The car swerved suddenly, pulling into a quiet side street. Michael killed the engine, plunging them into shadow. The only sound was their breathing and the soft tick of the cooling engine. When he turned to face her, his eyes held something that made her heart race. "Is that what you think this is?" His voice was rough with emotion. "Just business?" Grace felt the last of her careful control slipping away. "Isn't it? Isn't that what you wanted? A contract, nothing more?" Instead of answering, Michael reached across the console, his hand cupping her cheek. The touch was electric, sending shivers down her spine. His thumb traced her lower lip, smudging her perfect red lipstick. Grace couldn't help the small gasp that escaped her lips, and something in Michael's eyes darkened at the sound. "Tell me this is just business," Michael challenged, his hand still cradling her face in the darkness of the car. "Tell me you didn't feel anything when I held you on that dance floor. Tell me you don't feel this." Grace's heart thundered in her chest as she met his intense gaze. "We had a deal," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "A contract. Professional appearances, nothing more. Is that what you were doing with Wong? Making professional appearances?" The edge in his voice sent shivers down her spine. "Because from where I stood, it looked like torture. Watching his hands on you, seeing him make you laugh." "You don't get to be jealous," Grace cut in, sudden anger flaring in her chest. "You don't get to act possessive when you're the one who wanted this arrangement. You needed a wife for your image, remember? A perfect corporate partner to please your board." His fingers tensed against her cheek. "And you agreed because it was good business, didn't you? A convenient solution to your family's problems?" "Don't," she warned, but emotion made her voice crack. "Don't pretend you know why I agreed. You have no idea what it's been like living with you, pretending this is all for show when every touch." She stopped herself, but it was too late. Michael's eyes darkened. When every touch what, Grace? Grace closed her eyes, trying to steady her racing heart. 2 years, she whispered. 2 years of watching you from my desk outside your office. Of bringing you coffee every morning, noticing how your eyes would light up at the first sip. Of staying late to help with contracts, stealing glances when you were lost in thought. Michael's breath caught. Why didn't you ever say anything? A bitter laugh escaped her lips. What was I supposed to say? That your brilliant executive assistant was falling for you. That every time you smiled at me, really smiled, not your corporate mask, my heart would skip? I was professional. I had to be. His thumb traced her cheekbone as she spoke, each touch sending electricity through her skin. And now, he asked softly. These past 2 months, living together, pretending to be married, has it all been pretend? You know it hasn't, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Every morning I wake up wondering if this is the day I'll stop feeling this way. If this is the day I'll finally be able to look at you without wanting. She trailed off, vulnerability raw in her voice. Without wanting what? Michael's question hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Instead of answering, Grace found herself reaching up, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Michael remained perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter this moment. The only sound was their uneven breathing and the distant hum of city traffic. We shouldn't, she whispered, even as she leaned closer. The scent of his cologne filled her senses, making it hard to think clearly. The contract. To hell with the contract, Michael growled, pulling her close as his lips landed on hers. The kiss was nothing like their staged public pecks for the cameras. This was raw, desperate, years of restraint crumbling in an instant. His hand slid into her hair, cradling the back of her head as he pulled her even closer. Grace gasped against his mouth, and he took the opportunity to deepen the kiss. She tasted like champagne and promises, her lips soft beneath his. Grace's fingers curled into his shirt, holding on as if she might drown otherwise. Every brush of his lips sent fire through her veins, every touch of his hands made her skin burn. This was everything she'd dreamed of and nothing like she'd imagined. Michael kissed her like a man starved, like he'd been waiting for this moment as long as she had. His other hand found her waist, pulling her closer despite the car's console between them. When she made a small sound in the back of her throat, he groaned in response, the sound sending shivers down her spine. The kiss seemed to last forever and end too soon. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Michael rested his forehead against hers. His thumb brushed her lower lip, now slightly swollen from his kiss. I've wanted to do that since the day you saved the Hong Kong merger, he confessed roughly. Why didn't you? Grace asked softly, her fingers still curled in his shirt. Why did we need a contract to get here? Michael pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, his hand still cradling her face. Because I was afraid, he admitted, the words coming easier in the darkness of the car. Afraid of feeling something real. Business deals, contracts, mergers, those I understand. But this? His thumb traced her cheekbone. The way my heart races when you walk into a room, how I can't focus when you're near, that terrifies me. Grace's breath caught at his confession. I tried so hard not to fall for you, she whispered. Every morning, I'd tell myself it was just business. Every time you touched me, I'd remind myself it wasn't real. But then you'd look at me when no one was watching, and I'd forget all the reasons why this couldn't happen. I hated watching you with other men tonight, Michael confessed, his voice rough with emotion. Every time someone made you laugh, every time they touched you. I wanted to tell them you were mine. Not because of a contract, not because of business, but because. Because? Grace's heart thundered in her chest as she waited for his next words. Because somewhere between all the pretending, I stopped acting. His fingers tangled in her hair as he pulled her closer. Because every morning I wake up wanting to see you smile. Because every night I find reasons to stay up late just to spend more time with you. Because this stopped being about business the moment you signed that contract. Morning light streamed through the penthouse windows, finding Michael already awake, standing by the floor-to-ceiling glass. His reflection showed a man transformed, tie loosened, shirt slightly rumpled, hair bearing traces of feminine fingers. His lips still tingled from their kisses, marking the moment everything changed. The city sprawled before him, the empire he'd built with cold logic and careful planning. Yet this morning, for the first time in years, business was the last thing on his mind. Instead, his thoughts kept returning to the way Grace had felt in his arms, how perfectly she fit against him, the soft sounds she'd made when he'd kissed her. He turned as he heard movement in the kitchen, the familiar sound of coffee being made, cups clinking against saucers. Such a simple, domestic moment, yet it squeezed something in his chest. How many mornings had he taken these moments for granted? Treated them as part of their performance rather than the gift they were. Last night had stripped away all his carefully constructed walls. In the harsh light of morning, he couldn't deny it anymore, he'd fallen in love with his wife. Not the contract wife chosen for business stability, but the woman who hummed while reviewing reports, who left financial articles on his desk, who looked at him like he was more than his empire. Grace's hands trembled slightly as she prepared their morning coffee, the familiar routine doing nothing to calm her racing thoughts. Last night had changed everything. The safe boundaries of their contract marriage had shattered with that first real kiss, leaving her terrifyingly vulnerable. She stared at her reflection in the chrome of the coffee machine, lips still slightly swollen, cheeks flushed with memory. What happened now? In the darkness of last night, confessions had seemed possible, even right. But morning brought reality crashing back. She was still the executive assistant who'd married her boss for a contract. The business world would never see her as anything else. Her fingers brushed her wedding ring, the symbol that meant everything and nothing. What if Michael regretted last night? What if he'd woken up remembering she was an obligation, a business necessity? The thought made her chest tight. She couldn't bear to see him retreat behind his corporate mask, to watch him transform their passionate confessions into a momentary lapse in judgment. The weight of her family's dependence pressed down on her shoulders. Her mother's medical bills, David's education, all of it hinged on this marriage contract. One emotional night couldn't jeopardize their security. Yet the memory of Michael's touch, the raw honesty in his voice when he'd confessed his feelings, how could she go back to pretending after that? The contract sat in Michael's desk drawer, its presence felt even through solid wood and steel. Grace stared at the drawer as she set his coffee cup down, remembering the clinical language that had bound them together. 2 years. Public appearances. Mutual benefit. Nothing about falling in love. The board meeting later that morning felt like a ticking clock. Thomas Way would be there, watching them with his calculating eyes. The same man who'd helped craft their contract, who'd seen their marriage as nothing more than a strategic move to stabilize company shares. How would he read the change between them? Would he sense that their carefully constructed performance had become real? The penalties for breaking the contract were severe, designed to protect the company's interests, the shareholders' confidence. Pages of legal language outlined exactly how their lives would unravel if they deviated from the plan. Grace's family security, Michael's corporate stability, everything they'd built hung in the balance. Each clause felt like a chain now, binding them to their original agreement. A business arrangement, the contract stated. Nothing more. Michael watched Grace set down his coffee cup, noticing how she avoided his eyes. The businessman in him understood her hesitation. Everything about their situation demanded caution. The merger in Hong Kong, the board's expectations, the shareholders' confidence. His mind listed all the logical reasons to retreat back behind professional walls. But his heart remembered how she'd whispered his name in the darkness. How natural it felt to hold her, to finally stop pretending. The warmth in his chest when she'd confessed to years of hidden feelings matched his own secret longing. For the first time in his life, Michael Chen, the man who built an empire on rational decisions, found himself at war with his own logic. Grace stood by the window now, sunlight catching the diamond on her finger. She'd worn that ring as part of their contract, but this morning it felt different. His mind warned him about complications, about mixing business with pleasure, about the risks to everything they'd built. Yet his heart noticed how she unconsciously touched her lips, remembering their kisses. How she kept stealing glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking. The distance between them felt like miles, though only steps separated them. Every business instinct told him to maintain professional distance, to protect their careful arrangement. But something stronger pulled him toward her. The need to prove last night wasn't a dream, that the walls between them had truly crumbled. "Grace," he said softly, watching her shoulders tense at his voice. The sound hung in the air between them, carrying questions neither dared to ask. "You should get dressed, so we'd head to work," he finally spoke. The Chen Industries executive floor buzzed with subtle changes. Employees noticed how their CEO's morning coffee now came with 2 cups instead of 1. How Mrs. Chen's desk, while still efficiently organized, now held fresh flowers each morning. The way Mr. Chen's voice softened when speaking to his wife, even in the most professional settings. Small moments caught attention, lingering glances across conference rooms, fingers brushing during document exchanges, the gentle way he adjusted her necklace before important meetings. Their professional choreography had shifted, becoming something more intimate, more natural. The executive assistants whispered about how Grace now worked late without being asked, how Michael found reasons to leave his office door open when she was at her desk. Their carefully maintained corporate distance had developed hairline cracks, visible to those who knew where to look. Even their morning arrivals changed. Instead of their usual professional entrance, staff noticed them walking closer together, their steps in perfect sync. Sometimes they'd arrive sharing private jokes, their laughter echoing in the marble lobby before they composed themselves for the business day ahead. Thomas Wei watched the couple through narrowed eyes during the quarterly board meeting. Something had shifted in their dynamic, subtle changes that his decades of corporate experience couldn't miss. The way Michael's hand lingered on Grace's shoulder as she distributed reports. How she anticipated his needs before he voiced them, their movements synchronized like dancers who'd rehearsed for years. "They seem different," Margaret Ju murmured to him during a break. She'd noticed, too, the charged energy when they shared space, the way Michael's eyes followed Grace's movements. More authentic than our projections anticipated. The board had expected a convincing performance, had planned for public displays of affection and coordinated appearances. But this held none of the calculated precision they'd engineered. When Grace smiled at Michael across the conference table, her eyes held warmth no PR team could manufacture. "The market response has been exceptional," another board member commented, studying the latest stock reports. "Their marriage has boosted investor confidence beyond our estimates." Yet Thomas detected concern beneath the praise. They'd wanted stability, predictability, not the wild card of genuine emotion. During the financial presentation, Thomas observed how Michael leaned toward Grace when she spoke, his attention completely focused on her words. This wasn't the controlled CEO they'd groomed, the man who valued corporate interests above personal feelings. This was something more dangerous, a man falling in love with his contract wife. Their new reality required a delicate balance. During board meetings, Grace maintained her professional demeanor, taking careful notes while fighting the urge to meet Michael's intense gaze. Michael forced himself to review quarterly reports instead of watching the sunlight play in her hair, reminding himself that corporate walls had eyes. They developed a private language of subtle gestures. A light touch to his "time meant I miss you." His hand at the small of her back translated as "I can't wait to be alone." Quick glances and hidden smiles replaced the words they couldn't say in public. Each brief moment in the elevator became precious, stolen seconds when they could drop their masks. "The press is requesting another interview," Grace announced during a morning briefing, other executives present. "They want to do a feature on your corporate love story." Her voice remained steady, professional, though her heart raced at the irony. Their pretend romance had become real, yet now they had to hide their true feelings behind the very facade they'd created. Despite their efforts to maintain professional distance, their feelings deepened with each passing day. Grace found herself falling more deeply in love with the private Michael, the man who left coffee on her desk with little heart-shaped notes hidden underneath, who remembered how she liked her tea when she was stressed, who looked at her like she was his entire world when no one else was watching. Michael discovered new reasons to love Grace daily: her brilliant mind during strategy meetings, her quiet strength when handling difficult clients, the way she fought to hide her smile when he purposely stood too close during presentations. The business arrangement that had brought them together paled in comparison to the real connection growing between them. Their morning routine became precious territory, those quiet moments before the corporate world claimed them. Sometimes they'd linger over breakfast, fingers intertwined, neither wanting to break the spell. Other times, they'd steal kisses in the privacy of their kitchen, tasting coffee on each other's lips before facing the day. "We should review these contracts," Michael would say, his voice carrying a different meaning entirely. "Of course, Mr. Chen," Grace would reply, her eyes promising more than business discussion. What had started as a corporate arrangement had blossomed into something neither had expected, something real, powerful, and increasingly impossible to hide. Their hearts had torn up the contract their minds had signed, replacing calculated moves with genuine love. My beautiful story family, if this tale of unexpected love between Michael and Grace touched your heart so far, share it with someone special in your life. You know, that friend who still believes in beautiful love moments, who knows that sometimes the greatest love stories begin in the most unexpected ways. They need to hear this story. And trust me, what happens next between our CEO and his contract bride will make you believe that some loves are written in the stars. Will they choose their hearts over business? Will they risk everything for real love? To find out how their story ends, make sure you've joined our amazing story family by hitting that subscribe button and turning on all notifications. Because when two hearts are meant to be together, not even a contract can keep them apart. Michael stood in his office, staring at the speech prepared by his PR team for the shareholders' meeting. Perfect corporate language, reassuring investors about the stability of his marriage, the future of Chen Industries. Everything the board wanted to hear. His fingers traced the edges of the paper as memories flooded his mind. Grace's laugh in their kitchen that morning, the way she'd straightened his tie with tender familiarity, how she'd kissed him softly before transforming back into his professional executive assistant. Every moment they stole behind closed doors felt increasingly wrong, like caging something beautiful. The weight of his empire pressed down on him. Years of careful decisions, strategic moves, and calculated risks had built this corporate giant. One emotional choice could shake investor confidence, upset the board, destabilize everything he'd created. His logical mind screamed at him to stick to the script, to protect what he'd built. But then Grace walked past his office, and his heart made the decision his mind had been fighting. He tore the prepared speech in half, pulled out a blank paper, and began to write from his heart. Hours later, the annual shareholders' meeting buzzed with tension. 300 of Asia's most powerful investors filled the grand conference hall, their attention fixed on Michael as he stood at the podium. The board members sat in the front row, Thomas Wei's expression already darkening as if sensing what was coming. "For years, I've built this company on logic and calculated decisions," Michael began, his voice carrying across the hushed room. "Every choice, every merger, every contract crafted to maximize profit and minimize risk." His eyes found Grace in the crowd, and something in his expression made the photographer's cameras click frantically. "But today, I'm here to talk about the best decision I ever made, though not for the reasons any of us expected." He stepped away from the podium, moving to stand directly before the board. "6 months ago, you handed me a contract. A business arrangement disguised as a marriage. You chose my wife the way you'd choose a merger partner, analyzing benefits, calculating risks." The board member shifted uncomfortably as Michael continued. "You were right about one thing: Grace Chen has been the perfect partner for this company. Her intelligence, her dedication, her strength have enhanced everything we've built." His voice softened as he looked at her. But somewhere between the contracts and calculations, something unexpected happened. "I fell in love with my wife." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Grace's hands trembled in her lap as Michael walked toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. "Not because of any contract. Not because of business. But because she has the most brilliant mind and the most beautiful heart of anyone I've ever known." Grace rose from her seat, her heart pounding but her step steady as she walked toward Michael. The whispers of 300 shareholders faded into background noise. All her life, she'd been the practical one, the one who made safe choices, who put security above dreams. But Michael's words had unlocked something in her chest, a courage she didn't know she possessed. Standing before him now, in front of the most powerful people in Asian business, Grace lifted her chin and met his gaze. The cameras flashed frantically, capturing what would become tomorrow's headlines, but she didn't flinch. "Let them see. Let them all see what real love looked like. When I signed that contract," she said, her clear voice carrying across the silent hall, "I thought I was making a business decision. I thought I was being practical, protecting my family's future." Her eyes never left Michael's as she continued. "Instead, I found something I never expected, the courage to be more than what others wanted me to be. The strength to love without conditions or calculations." Michael reached into his suit jacket and pulled out the contract, the document that had brought them together and kept them apart. The papers that had defined their relationship now felt flimsy in his hands, meaningless compared to the truth in their hearts. "This contract," he announced, holding it up for all to see, "valued my wife at profit margins and stock prices. It reduced love to legal clauses and business terms. His fingers gripped the edges of the paper. But Grace Chen is worth more than every company I own, every deal I've made, every dollar in our accounts. Thomas Wei stood abruptly. Mr. Chen, consider carefully. That contract protects billions in shareholder value. The penalties for breach mean nothing. Michael cut him off. With deliberate movements, he began tearing the contract, the sound of ripping paper echoing through the conference hall. I'm not destroying this because it's bad business. I'm destroying it because my wife deserves a real marriage, not a corporate arrangement. Grace stepped forward, taking half the contract from his hands. Together, they tore the remaining pages, letting the pieces flutter to the marble floor. Photographers surged forward, cameras flashing at the symbolic moment. The board members watched in stunned silence as their careful plans fell apart like the scattered papers at their feet. The penalties in this contract, Grace spoke up, her voice strong and clear, threatened to take everything from us if we fell in love. But real love isn't something you can control with legal documents or corporate threats. It happens in quiet moments, in small gestures, in choosing each other every day. Michael pulled Grace into his arms, no longer caring about corporate protocol or shareholder reactions. For the first time, he kissed her in front of everyone, not the careful, staged kisses of their contract marriage, but a real kiss that spoke of love and promise. The conference hall erupted in applause, drowning out the board's objections. Chen Industries was built on trust. Michael addressed the shareholders, keeping one arm around Grace. Today, I'm asking you to trust in something more powerful than contracts and calculations. Trust in two people who found real love in the most unexpected place. Trust that a man who loves deeply will lead better than one who loves only profit. The stock tickers on the wall began to move. As news of their declaration spread, share prices didn't plummet as the board had feared, they rose. The world, it seemed, believed in love more than legal arrangements. Investors were choosing to trust in something real rather than something orchestrated. The board thought they were giving me a business partner, Michael said softly, looking down at Grace. Instead, they gave me the greatest gift of my life, they led me to you. Grace reached up to touch his face, her eyes shining. No more pretending? No more pretending, he promised. From now on, just real love, real life, real us. The morning sun streamed through the conference hall windows, catching on Grace's wedding ring, no longer a prop in a corporate play, but a symbol of genuine love. They had chosen each other, not for business, not for show, but for the simple, powerful truth of their hearts. That evening, Michael insisted on driving to Grace's family home. Her mother's small apartment, once filled with worry about medical bills and financial strain, now echoed with joyful tears. Michael knelt beside Mrs. Mitchell's chair, taking her weathered hands in his. Your daughter taught me what real wealth means, he told her, his voice thick with emotion. I promise you'll never worry about medical care again. He pulled out documents showing her transfer to the city's best medical facility, all expenses covered not through a contract, but through love. David rushed home from medical school when he heard the news. His tired eyes lit up seeing his sister's genuine happiness, so different from the brave face she'd worn for years. No more night shifts at the campus cafe, Grace told him, squeezing his hand. Just focus on becoming the doctor you were meant to be. The relief on her family's faces meant more to Grace than any corporate merger or business deal. Their burdens lifted not because of a calculated arrangement, but because love had transformed their lives. Her mother could finally focus on healing instead of worrying about bills. David could pursue his dreams without the weight of debt. You didn't have to do this, Grace whispered to Michael as they watched her mother and brother laugh together, a sound she hadn't heard in years. "I didn't do it because of any obligation," he replied, pulling her close. "I did it because your family is my family now. Real family, not just on paper." Grace realized then that true wealth wasn't measured in contract clauses or settlement amounts. It lived in the joy on her mother's face, the hope in her brother's eyes, and the love she shared with a man who'd chosen her over his carefully constructed corporate world. She hadn't gained millions in her bank account, but she'd won something far more precious, genuine love that transformed not just her life, but touched everyone she cared about. Looking around at her small family, now complete with a man who loved her for exactly who she was, Grace knew they'd written a better story than any contract could create. One where love didn't just win, it made everything it touched richer, deeper, and more beautiful than mere money ever could. My beautiful story family, Grace and Michael's journey reminds us that real love doesn't follow contracts or calculations. Sometimes it finds us in the most unexpected places, between coffee cups and corporate meetings, between duty and desire. Their story teaches us that true love transforms everything it touches, not just two hearts, but entire families, entire worlds. When we open ourselves to genuine connection, when we let our heart speak louder than our fears, we discover that love is the greatest business of all, with returns that no spreadsheet could ever measure. Sometimes the biggest risks bring the greatest rewards. Just like Grace and Michael, we all face moments when we must choose between playing it safe and following our hearts. Maybe you're standing at that crossroads right now, wondering if you should take that leap of faith. Remember, every great love story started with someone brave enough to risk everything for what their heart knew was right. The most beautiful chapters of our lives often begin when we find the courage to go off script, to choose love over logic, to trust that our hearts know the way. Speaking of taking chances, my beautiful story family, next time I'll share a tale that will make your hearts race. A ruthless billionaire who's sworn never to love again meets a fierce small-town bakery owner who challenges everything he believes. When his company threatens to destroy her family's legacy, she stands up to him in ways no one ever has before. But what happens when attraction ignites between sworn enemies? Stay tuned, because this story of passion, pride, and sweet revenge will show you how thin the line between love and hate can be. Until we meet again, my precious story family, keep believing in the power of true love. Thank you for sharing this journey with me, for every like, comment, and beautiful message you leave. Your presence here makes every story more magical. Remember to follow your hearts, just like Grace and Michael did, because sometimes the greatest risk is not taking one at all. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to share it with someone special. I'll see you in our next adventure where another unforgettable love story awaits. Stay blessed, stay loved.